So I'm going to introduce myself and then the speakers, and then we'll hopefully have time for questions. I would really encourage you to use the chat function to put questions down as they occur. So try and type the questions in the side panel, and then we'll try and use those. But of course, if we can't cover all the topics that we've hoped to cover in this talk, we can also run other webinars in the future, and we're certainly intending to do that. So my name is Simon Duffy. I'm the director of the Centre for Welfare Reform. The Centre for Welfare Reform is an independent think tank based in Sheffield, but we have fellows all around the world. The idea of the Centre for Welfare Reform is essentially quite simple. It's to try and improve the welfare state and to create a world where everybody matters. So we think that the welfare state's a brilliant and necessary thing, but it could work a lot better to make everybody more powerful. The Centre for Welfare Reform is also a member of Citizen Network, which is a global cooperative to advance a world where everybody matters. And it's free to join Citizen Network. So if you've not done so, I'd encourage you to join Citizen Network. And you can also subscribe to the Centre's monthly newsletter. The Centre was set up in order to try and improve the welfare state in 2009. But of course, quite often we find ourselves just having to defend the welfare state from what seem to be unfair cuts, particularly cuts and damaging policies that seem to target people in poverty and disabled people. So the challenge for the Centre has been to try and carry on with the work of trying to improve the welfare state while also standing up for the welfare state, and more importantly, standing alongside disabled people and other people who have been subject to unfair attacks. That's quite a challenge. Think tanks normally get funding from government, and government doesn't like it if you criticise them. And so the Centre has had to manage to survive with very, very few resources. This webinar is provided for free. Everything that we do, we provide free materials on our website. If you feel that you can, we'd welcome donations. The Centre is a tiny organisation with making no profit. One thing we have started this month is a new initiative called the Cooperative for Welfare Reform. Several fellows of the Centre, led by Chris Watson, who's going to be the first speaker, have organised a co-op to try and provide practical assistance for organisations and for people who want to try and make things better. So please look out for their information. Again, all of this will be made available to you after the talk and in later talks. Other members of the co-op include Liz Leach and Sarah Holmes, who will be giving next week's free Friday webinar. The idea of this webinar, this is the first of what we intend to be an ongoing series. I think we might take a summer holiday sometime in August, but we'll continue to provide this kind of free information as on a weekly basis if we can do, just going forward now, because it seems like such a useful thing, and it's been one of the blessings of this terrible COVID crisis is we are learning to use this technology, and that is helping people to break down barriers and to communicate in new ways. So that's a general introduction. The topic of this talk is individual service funds. Back in 1995, I published a book called Unlocking the Imagination, which described the idea of an individual service fund. And in 1996, I set up an organisation in Glasgow called Inclusion Glasgow, which at the time I thought was the first organisation to offer individual service funds. Actually, I discovered that Patty Scott was doing exactly the same thing in America at the same time. And when we did some research recently, we discovered there was an organisation in the Netherlands that started even a year before us. So there's clearly something in the air in the mid-90s. The idea of an individual service fund, Chris and Gary and Jackie will talk about in more detail, but essentially it's quite simple. It's saying the money that people need for support is their money, but sometimes it's really good if somebody else can manage that for you and help you get the best out of that money. And that's what an individual service fund is in its simplest form. We did a lot of work with the idea, getting people out of institutions in Glasgow in the late 90s. It was very successful, and the Centre has published many reports on the positive outcomes of using individual service funds. What's been slightly depressing, sad, has been that there's been very little take-up of this idea still today. When I was running a project called In Control from 2003 to 2009, we included the idea of individual service funds in all of the work that we shared. And I naively expected local government and commissioners to embrace this idea because it offered them a way of improving the quality of support, making services more flexible, helping people get better lives. And not increasing costs. You would think that would be a natural thing that people would want to do, but for lots of reasons, people struggle to do it. It was included in the 2014 Care Act, and Chris might touch on that, but it is quite confusing, the 2014 Care Act, and it hasn't, again, led to big changes yet in practice. Fortunately, in Scotland, I think the legislation is much clearer, and in Scotland, this kind of approach is called option 2. So option 1 is what's also called direct payments. You take direct control of the cash. Option 2 is the cash is basically managed by somebody else. In 2015, I was researching progress on individual service funds as part of work to look at what needed to happen to support the Care Act. It was depressing to find that many local authorities had not implemented the idea at all, even though it had been around at that point for 20 years. But a little while later, through Gary Kent, in fact, who's one of our speakers today, I was introduced to Chris Watson, who at that time was a commissioner in Dorset. And I was blown away by what Chris had achieved with his colleagues in Dorset. He'd thought about individual service funds at a properly deep level, and he'd worked out how to get the commissioning system to take this idea seriously, not just as a marginal option, but really as the basis for all commissioning. So I'm delighted that Chris became a fellow of the Centre for Welfare Reform. I'm really excited that he has taken forward the idea of the cooperative for welfare reform, and I'm looking forward to hearing him tell us a little bit about ISFs as an approach that local government and the NHS and others, in fact, could take a lot more seriously. So at this point, Chris, I should be able to unmute you. No. Yes, Chris, no. Can you unmute yourself, Chris, maybe? Yes.
Yep.
So, Chris, over to you.
Thank you. Sorry. Right, hopefully that's come up okay. Yeah, thank you for that introduction. I guess from there it can only go downhill. Right, so just going to check. Hopefully everybody can see that. Just going to start my slides now. So just to tell you a little bit about me, so you know kind of where I've come from. Excuse my COVID hairstyle in that photos a few weeks ago when it was getting a bit wild. So I started out working with people as a support worker for the NHS in what was called at the time locally based hospital units for people with learning disabilities. I kind of got a bit disillusioned with that really as a way to treat people, and then moved on to start working in residential care services, and then I got into providing support to people in community in their own homes, which was fantastic. I was lucky enough to get involved in a hospital closure programme kind of in the mid-noughties, which is how I came across a lot of Simon's work and Dorian Kelly and some of the other fellows from the centre, where we helped people move out of locally based hospital units into their own accommodation. I then kind of went on, and yeah, please forgive me for this, I went into commissioning and led on kind of a lot of flexible support brokering for people, trying to create personalised packages of care and support for people with learning disabilities and people with mental health illness. And then after the Care Act, as Simon's touched on in 2014, we kind of got into individual service funds and working out how councils could potentially use individual service funds to empower people to take more control of their lives, basically. A couple of years ago, I left that to set up my own company, and we now work with local authorities and CCGs around the country to help them redesign their systems to try and grow the numbers of people that are using and benefiting from this. Also work as an advisor and associate consultant with a few different organisations, including obviously the Co-op for Welfare Reform, which Simon's just talked about.
Yeah, it was only because Alana had called me about Sherry and her test, and I think I just agree with you, and I've checked with Jerry as
Sorry, did I disappear then? Okay, hopefully I'm back. So for me, individual service funds are about citizenship, first and foremost. This diagram is something I came across from Simon. I think it was in the Keys to Citizenship, but I think I remember reading this in 2003 when I was working, as a direct support worker, and thinking, wow, this is really simple. What a great concept. This idea of people taking the money in the budget away from services and kind of working out how to use it themselves. And I think, the premise of moving away from the professional gift, for me, some of those professional services that I worked in, they certainly weren't gifts for people. But the concept of obviously, professionals deciding what people have is really what we're trying to undo, I guess, through personal budgets and self-directed support. Trying to move people away from, from being seen as recipients of services and kind of grateful recipients of services. And I still talk to people now who are just really happy to have some support, which for me shows us how far we've still got to go to try and switch people's thinking around and help people feel empowered, to take control of their budgets and their lives really away from services. Very much for me, it's around going towards having a clear entitlement. So it's the person's budget, it's not services budget. And I think that's a concept that is still alien, I think, in quite a few areas to people that work in, in commissioning teams. It's about a personal budget. It's not necessarily your budget, it's the person's entitlement to, to that funding. So, and for me, obviously, freedom to use creativity and your own judgment is absolutely paramount within this. Of course, you should be able to design your own support around you. It's about moving away from segregation towards citizenship and community. And the most important point, I think, at the end of that is it's about good lives. It's not about services. It's just about people creatively designing services around themselves and getting lives that they want to live. So I was told not to do too many technical slides because I'm bad for that, but I've done a couple. So this is what an ISF arrangement could look like. So in simple terms, as Simon said earlier, it's a personal budget that's held by an organisation on behalf of the person. It's effectively their entitlement. So it's their money after they've been through the NHS or social services assessment. They get given a personal budget, and that's basically what the ISF is. It's an organisation that will hold that personal budget on your behalf. So that can be either as a direct payment. So direct payments for us is always still the kind of preferred route for people to take if you want, maximum choice and control. Taking a direct payment is probably the first port of call really within there. But obviously, if you don't want to take a direct payment, then the option of having an individual service fund is obviously, it broadens the range of things that you can do because it gives you loads of flexibility. And it means you can take control of it. It's your budget and you decide what you do with it. So at the moment, the Care Act talks about individual service funds. Because I'm a bit of a nerd, I know that it mentions them 14 times. I know also that the NHS have produced guidance around personal health budgets, and that's a lot more clear actually as an entitlement. So local authorities at the moment don't have to offer individual service funds, but the Care Act says very much it is a very good thing to do and something that all local authorities should consider doing around the country. The NHS is actually much clearer around that, and anybody who is assessed and eligible for continuing healthcare funding or under Section 117 aftercare arrangements under the Mental Health Act can now ask for an individual service fund. There's an extra entitlement kind of built into that. So that came in December 2019, so that was really, really good progress. So it's another slightly technical slide, but I just thought it'd be useful to just see what an arrangement kind of looks like. They're really simple. I think people maybe worry that they're complicated, but they're not really. Basically, the person has, you know, an assessment and a support plan, which you would have anyway. And you decide who would like to hold your ISF, basically. There's then an agreement between the funding organisation, which would be, you know, the NHS or the local authority, and the organisation that's going to hold the individual service fund for the person. And then normally there's an agreement between the person and the organisation that's holding their ISF, which basically sets out how they're going to work together and how they're going to make decisions and how things are going to work in practical terms. So it's quite a simple kind of arrangement. So I guess the question for me is, why are individual service funds important? I know we talked about at the start of the presentation a little bit around that, but we know that personalised services are better for people. We all know that. There's loads of evidence around that now, academic evidence. You know, we know from people, personalising services is better for everybody. We're all unique, and we need flexible support that can adapt responsively and without unnecessary friction. There's a lot of friction in bureaucracy and in processes that mean people can't get adaptable support very easily. And individual service funds really free some of that up, and they reduce some of that friction. People change over time, you know, who knew? But support is often contracted really rigidly, you know, for months and years sometimes. So when people get their original kind of budget set up, it's based on where they are at that point in their life. And if they don't get a review for 12 months, maybe even 24 months, all those changes in between, all those kind of things that people would like to then change around their support, are kind of restricted by the availability of that kind of review process, really. Direct payments are great. We love direct payments. Direct payments are still, for me, as I said earlier, the number one route for people to take control over, you know, over their support. But they're not for everybody. There's restrictions around direct payments. There's issues around, you know, kind of signing direct payment agreements, having a suitable person, and also there can be a lot of admin involved with direct payments, particularly if you want to try and employ your own workers. It can be a bit of a nuisance for people. We've had lots of feedback saying really that as well. So what that means, you know, when you look at it nationally, and this does vary by local authority area, the statistics are really interesting. It varies from really low, sort of 15% of people have a direct payment in some areas, up to like 53% of people in other areas. So on average in England, only 28.5% of people are using a direct payment at the moment, which for me means that there's 71.5% of people out there who don't have that element of choice and control around how their support is configured. So that's the area we're trying to tackle through individual service funds, I guess. When I was thinking about the benefits of ISFs, I thought, rather than me sort of say what they were, there's a chap down in Weymouth locally called Luke, and I think he's had his individual service fund, it must be for about 3 years now. He was one of the guys that took them on kind of when we started up in Dorset with ISFs. And I just think, you know, he did us a little presentation, you know, kind of a few months ago, and I think this just really highlights for me what the benefits of the ISF are, really. You know, for him, it was around, he chose who supported him, so it's about choice and control. It's his personal budget. He decided who supported him, which was fantastic. You know, he said every meeting I had I was able to make my own decisions, so he's put at the centre of decision making around his life. People around him helped to provide information so he could choose. So that's about good information advice, really simple stuff. And he said that he thought the children and adult services worked really well together, which was great. So there was that real element of like partnership working around the person. He also chose an organisation called DOSH, so Charity for People with Learning Disabilities, to help them manage their finances. And I think that the final one for me is obviously the key one, really. You know, he said he has choice and control over his support and his life, which I think for me is really, in a nutshell, what the benefits are really with ISFs. So the other bit I thought would cover, because it's impossible to get away from some of the kind of what's happening now with commissioning, really, around ISFs and around more traditional commissioning. And I know, again, this varies by area, and all commissioning, all local authorities and CCGs are in different places, you know, absolutely. But for me, this was some of the issues around kind of what is traditional service-led commissioning. And that for me is when, you know, it's about the local authority thinking about their money, and then their processes, their stuff around procurement, you know, how people manage budgets internally, how tendering is undertaken, and kind of decision-making sitting with the organisation. And then, you know, I've done a little diagram of it, obviously, like looking through the kind of lens of process and service-led support. And it's almost deciding what people have available in their local community and what support they can kind of tap into. So I think that's quite, yeah, that's for me that's a very traditional commissioning model. And like I said, it's not necessarily in all areas, but I think that's the problem we're trying to tackle, I think, through individual service funds, is to move away from this kind of top-down commissioning where the offer is put on the table for you based on what the commissioning organisation wants to see locally. So where we'd like to kind of move it to is very much towards community-led support. So for me, that's commissioners, people and families and communities getting together and figuring out what they would like to see locally for them. What are the services and supports that people want locally? And then when you add personal budgets into that mix, you've effectively created a whole network of people and families who are micro-commissioning their own services, and they're creating what is this rainbow, which is obviously TLAP, Think Local, Act Personal, their kind of community innovation rainbow, which is a brilliant resource if you want to go in there and see, you know, see what's out there. But some of the things that have come out of that are very simple. They've just been services around information advocacy, socialising and fun, friendship and befriending, helping the home or garden, personal care, creative activities, sports and leisure. So that's the kind of range of things, in contrast to what commissioners might necessarily set up in an area. It's quite a different range of options there that kind of get built when people get together in communities and decide how they want their budgets to be used, and help communities then build an offer that they can then utilise. So I think there's in quite a few areas that there's some good things going on around ISFs for me. So I thought I'd do like some shout outs really for some of these areas. So Wiltshire Council and Wiltshire CCG are doing some really interesting work, working with an organisation called Lives Through Friends with individual service funds, working to help people come out of inpatient hospital units. And Lives Through Friends are acting as a kind of mentor and support broker to kind of to just basically make that process happen much more quickly and be much more person-centred. Bristol City Council doing some really interesting work with individual service funds, working with locality and Power to Change to basically try and set up what we call community anchor organisations and make ISFs flow to those community anchor organisations who will then, you know, work with people locally to decide how their support needs are met. Wakefield Council, got given big shout out really. Wakefield are fantastic at the moment. They've got loads of people using ISFs up north. Really forward thinking council. I think probably for me the best example in the country at the moment of a council that's really got to grips with individual service funds and taking it to kind of the next level. We're also doing some interesting work in Essex, and that's around Basildon district. So Essex are trying to work out how to give everybody in Basildon access to an individual service fund, and in that area also will be community catalysts who are working. So we're trying to link together the community catalysts approach, which is around growing small local micro provider organisations, and we're going to try and connect them up to individual service funds to really broaden out that range of options for people locally. So it's my last slide. So I think this is really, you know, poignant and pertinent for me around, you know, every time you spend money, you're casting a vote for the kind of world that you want. And I think, you know, being very much a commissioner and having that background, I think it's, for me, it's always been something I've thought, you know, whose money is this? What are we doing with it? Where are we flowing it to? And how can we best move choice and control over to individuals and let people build lives around them that make sense to them, and basically, you know, what they want rather than what commissioners want. So that's it. So thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, Chris. Good job. Well timed, if I might say, in my role as chair. Okay, thank you. That was really clear and helpful. So I'm going to now introduce Gary and Jacqui. I've not properly met Jacqui, but I met Gary quite a few years ago now. He was one of those people, one of those rare service providers who grasped the need to really work alongside every individual as an individual and really help figure out with people what was important to them and design support around them. And that was so exciting. And it's been great working with him over the last few years. He's a fantastic guy. So you need to unmute yourselves, guys, from, can you do that?
Hello.
Good afternoon.
Hello, well, I'm Gary Kent. I work in the Southwest. I have a dom care agency for people with learning disabilities. And I've been working with ISFs now for about 10 years all in all.
I'm Jacqui Hendra. I'm a social care assessor with Devon County Council, and I've been involved with the ISFs working alongside Nuki and Gary since 2019.
And the reason we're doing a joint venture here is because it is so important to understand that everything to do with an ISF is joint working. So people we support are the most important people in this, but we can't do it without Devon County Council or without the provider. So really for me, the background of this was I kind of got involved with ISFs properly through Chris. And I went down to Dorset, wasn't the provider in Dorset, and worked with him, looking at how ISF should be, working with the council, working with providers. And then I came back and to my own county, Devon, and talked to my commissioners, who were absolutely amazing. And we talked about ISFs and would they take it on as a pilot, which they did. And we started running a pilot for ISFs a few years ago now. The real big thing about Devon is from commissioning, the top of commission, they worked very hard at the beginning to get all the right things in place for the legalities of it.
So when I first started working with Gary, and my understanding was very limited of ISF, I felt, how is this any different from a commission service? So I met with Gary and we worked very closely together for me to get a better understanding of how ISF work, and also teaching Gary about where DCC work and how we provide our services, especially around our eligibility criteria and outcomes. So along that journey, I certainly learned a lot and about how creative you can be with an ISF and the benefits that it has to those people that are now utilising the ISF.
Right, and I think the next part for us was the obstacles. When we started working with Devon, which was quite an amazing time. Can you put them on, Chris? I'm just try and get my slides up quickly. When we worked with the obstacles, some of the things we had to kind of really think about as a council were like the legal agreements, the frameworks, how we were going to talk to people and introduce it, where was the money going to be held, the consultation period with people, explaining the difference between an ISF and a direct payment, understanding eligibility criteria, understanding new ways of working. And then we kind of got really involved with the thing called the 247 grid, which really kind of spiked on a lot of independence for people we support. So at this stage, we kind of now started moving forward, overcoming a lot of the obstacles that were creating and holding things back for Devon.
So for me, it was certainly important to work with them, the provider, and develop a relationship so I could trust in the provider and we were transparent with communication with each other. Certainly in the beginning, I was quite concerned about the provider undertaking reviews and whether the provider and the support staff would be working towards the outcomes that were set by Devon County.
So now, now we actually looked at how we were going to do the next part of it, which was, as a provider, how were we going to make the awareness of this happen? The first thing that I really kind of worked with was, yes, I can have the belief that someone I support should have that kind of individual right to their money and actually holding their money. But really, it was learning the side of Devon County Council, how they work, and actually bringing them aboard with us, and not having this segregation of a provider, a person, and the council. and actually to make the whole thing work as one. So I suppose that was the collaboration effect was really important, and it was like a wake-up call to us that we had to work together, not separately.
So we were really focusing on genuine person-centred outcomes and working closely together to shift people's ways of thinking from hours to outcomes. So it was very important to write good outcomes for the individuals. And whereas before I would set how they meet those outcomes, that control went over to the person along with the support network.
So at this stage, kind of the process we followed, I mean, the first thing really, I mean, is not reinventing the wheel. So we went back to my greatest thing I use, which is a path, and working with the person about what they want their life to be like, how they want to live their life. And really, at this stage, I introduced Jacqui, not she knew about the past, but we actually used it as a tool for using as an assessment for social services. So actually, we would sit jointly and work with someone at their review on a path together, which Jacqui would formulate the assessment from.
So using the path with the person that was being supported enabled us all to learn about the person, even the support network that had been supporting the people for 10, 15 years. So then looking at what their wishes were for the future, their interests, that was all gathered through the path, we were able to set some of those to the outcomes.
And at this stage as well, we started thinking about it doesn't all have to be a provider providing those things for that person. It can be volunteers, it can be the community, it can be different aspects of their families at different times, delivering this support to them and actually working as a whole one together to actually make someone's life better.
And really, it was an understanding of all those involved, so the provider, Devon County Council, and also the support staff, about how different and creative you could be and flexible working with the ISF, which was a real shift from the usual commission service.
And I think at this stage, we started talking about using the grid to help people understand their money. So the 247 grid was quite important to me. So people could actually, if they don't actually understand what the concept of the money is, they could actually understand, actually, this is my one-to-one time, this is my shared hours, this is my at-home time.
So we particularly worked with one house where 3 people shared, and Janis was somebody that we introduced to the ISF. Janis had been having a commission service for probably 25, 30 years. And Janis was very keen to move over to ISF to take some control back herself. Within no time, it was very apparent that Janis had a lot more skills than she had been showing. And she had the opportunity to use a pad to record herself cooking, cleaning, and also we introduced a medical dispenser, and within a week she is now administrating her own meds and doesn't rely on support for this. She can now prepare her own lunch, and for me it's just quite sad that this didn't happen a long time ago in the usual commission service. But the 247 grid also give us the ability to see how she was spending her week and what she was doing, and then together we could set small goals for her to work on to promote her independence.
So when we talk about setting small goals and when we talk about Janis's independence, so we've got 3 case studies. The first one is about making someone independent and how that does, using the budget kind of not around hours and money. That was really hard to get my staff's head around that because they're so task orientated around time and money. So actually, you know, to give the power to the person and the staff members to come back with ideas about things they needed and wanted to make their lives more important. Like them, she wanted to, always had wanted to actually administrate her own medication. You know, after many years now, she's doing that within a week of actually having the right tools to do it. Having an iPad so she could actually learn how to kind of focus task cooking. That was absolutely amazing. So we were hitting targets. But the biggest thing for me in all of this with Janis, what she told us last week, because we Zoom call into her every week now, the care manager, myself and Janis and her team all meet once a week by Zoom. She tells us some of the things she wants to do and has achieved. And one of the biggest achievements, she said, was, I don't want to go back to my day service this week. I've got an allotment. I want to spend my time down on my allotment. And I've got a volunteer who's going to come down with me. Now, that was an absolute amazing part. She's didn't want to go back to her day service. But she now got herself an allotment with a member of staff. And she then said, I'd like somebody I know somewhere else to come and share some time with me down there. So actually, her networks were getting a lot bigger in a very quick space of time by giving her that power.
For Janis and those in that house, they were having a shared housing agreement. So they were sharing their hours between each other. But now with the ISF, it gives them control that they can actually share hours with other people in the community, true friends that they had, where they would like to spend time with. And that's been a real breakthrough.
Then we can talk about James. James, again, has exactly the same outcomes, exactly the same Zoom calls as Janis, and he's met many, many outcomes, James, which he wanted to do. And his father's there in the pink shirt explaining the difference, the confidence that his son has now got to what he had before. But I suppose one of the biggest things I wanted to talk about with James was we actually could not spend James's budget. And at the end of it, we've got a lump of money that he cannot use because he's been so creative in getting the things he wanted, and sometimes through volunteers in different ways, he's not been able to use the budget that social services have. There's money to go back because he doesn't need it. That's not every single person, but for this person, this was a significant saving, and it was a really big success. And then I suppose Trudy was another one. Jackie and I meet Trudy every single week on Zoom, and when we meet Trudy, we talk to her very honestly about how are things, how's your staff team, the staff team on Zoom with her. But she now is beginning to understand through the grid what her money means and where her time is being spent, one-to-one shared hours independently. And the big thing about this as well, she now submits a bill to our finance team about the hours of what she has spent that week. And then we actually base our billing on what Trudy has told us that she spent money on. So we pay all the relevant people, including ourselves, but other people as well, who she has been in contact with, or we might even buy equipment for Trudy if she needs it. So she, again, has become very independent, as well as meeting her outcomes, but the knowledge about what her budget was. Because a lot of people with disabilities don't even know what budget they have, or even what really hours they've got and how they're split up and spent.
Certain areas of her support, she will always require to be supported. But what Trudy now understands and what she's developed herself is within the 247 grids, there's colours. So red means that they're supported, but there are different shades of colour. So initially she was in a real deep red where it was all being done for her. Trudy's now being able to move the colour red where she is being supported, but they are in the background, and she's taking control over her life. And to see the enjoyment and the enthusiasm from all the ladies, from how they've developed their skills, is just been real heartwarming.
So the benefits. I think for me, the benefits are the person we support have the choice and control. They're now telling us what hours we have supported them and what other people have supported them. I have never seen outcomes for people being met so quickly, because the people are setting the outcomes themselves, not social services coming in saying, these are the outcomes we want you to work to. I think the other thing for me was the flexibility of it. So we can change it on a daily basis if we need to. If Trudy changes her mind and she doesn't want to do something, she can go and do something else. That's fine, as long as we can actually make sure that it's all recorded and in the right way. But working and understanding that it works to the eligibility criteria of social services. Interestingly, one thing that did come from this, and Chris and I worked quite hard on at one time, was when Jackie explained about the eligibility criteria, there was no easy read eligibility criteria at all. We've developed an easy read eligibility criteria for people we support and their staff teams to understand, so which when they set outcomes, they can understand that these are the eligibility criteria that the money is to be used for.
What has been a real positive for those on an ISF if they do want to change any of their care or the way they're supported, this can be done quickly and easily for the person. They don't need to come back to Devon County and wait on a waiting list for a review to change the support. They've now taken that control. And certainly through this COVID-19 pandemic, it really has come into its own. And for me as a social care professional, those on ISF manage themselves, whereas those on commission services was a lot of work for the county to deal with through this pandemic.
And I suppose really kind of the sustainability of it all is we actually can monitor somebody's kind of with them very easily, their spending, how their budgets, what they've got left, are they overspending, underspending, and we expect it to kind of go up and down in peaks. But actually what we have found is the more power we give to people, the more power they're willing to take on, and the more outcomes can be met for that person. I think that's the biggest thing I've seen in my career is in the last 3 or 4 years, people having ISFs, the benefit for them is control and actually better life.
And those people that are now on an ISF that I've moved over to an ISF send me their 247 grid each week. I don't need to see it each week, but it is great to see, and I can see exactly where there's the support is being provided throughout the week and how they're meeting their outcomes. So really, they're getting a little mini review each week just by me seeing this. And at times I've made some suggestions of how they could do things different, but they've really embraced it and enjoying the big change in their lives.
I think for me as a provider, one of the big things I want to see is one of the main stumbling blocks for me was my support teams at times, actually having to work in a total different way around, not from time and task, but actually being really accountable to the person and helping the person be accountable for their money and how they're doing things and how they're being supported. It was such a shift. It really took some work around workshops and different things of explaining, and we do that on a regular basis still with people we support and with families and with our staff teams. So in the next 18 months, I would like to see everybody we support within our organisation, whether they're on a commission service or not a commission service, but running their budgets and actually understanding their budgets a lot better, and that is my aim within the next 18 months.
So from my perspective, certainly moving forward, I will be promoting ISF through the assessment process and encouraging others to consider the ISF. That's also offering peer support, because many of the social workers that even I work with haven't got a great understanding of ISF, as I didn't when I first set out. I always believed that I worked in a person-centred way. However, I've really developed that and just changed my way of thinking using the path, and also taking time to broaden my knowledge of alternatives in the local community and looking at asset-based approaches. And I've worked for Devon County 25 years, but I'm really enjoying my role within Devon County using the ISF, and it looks, a real bright creative future, and really the person taking control of their lives as it should have been all along.
And I just very finally want to say one thing. I think for me, I've been in this working with learning disabilities since 1981, so a long time, and I've seen many changes in that period of time. But one of the biggest changes I've seen is what Simon has really kind of promoted since the day I've known Simon, is that people should have control of their lives. And we are very good at taking that control away from people, social services, providers, and even families at times. Actually, I think when we start working very well together and putting the person right in the centre and listen to what they want, they're very able to tell us how they can do things and often save a lot of money by doing it the way they want to do it.
And I think it's really important for all the local authorities out there to work closely with the provider. I had real concerns starting out, and I didn't have trust in the provider, but working closely together is the key to a successful future. So please get out there, try the ISFs.
Please, yes, thank you.
Thanks, guys. You did really well because there was a lot to cover. A lot of people are asking about seeing the slides in more details, but we'll put all of this stuff up online afterwards. We should be able to send you a link. Some of the technology here we're only doing for the first time, but if you're ever uncertain, if you go to the Citizen Network website, and you'll find there's a resources section for webinars, and we'll be putting this into the Self-Directed Support Network, which is a global network of information about self-directed support, because there's all sorts of good and interesting things going on around the world. Now, I've asked Chris to unmute himself. I've left Gary and Jackie unmuted. There are a ton of interesting, really good questions in the chat boxes. So I can ask them questions and try and use them. We've got 12 minutes left. I don't know if, Chris, I sent you a message saying, encouraging you to have a look at some of the questions. Did you have a chance to see some of the questions that maybe you could answer quickly? And maybe Gary and Jackie, you could look at some of the questions also. But did you see anything you wanted to immediately come back to where you thought you could offer a helpful response?
Just maybe around I think there's a question around, you know, which kind of group of people are primarily using individual service funds at the moment. And I think, you know, for me, it's probably people with learning disabilities, where most of the pilots around individual service funds, and most of the offers that have been developed by local authorities have been around people with learning disabilities. There's not been much done around offering access to older people and people with mental health illness. And I think that's probably, I think the question was actually framed around, you know, what direct payment numbers are lower for the over 65 group, which is, and is ISF reflective of that as well, which I would say yes. But I actually think the ISF has quite a big potential in that group of people because of the reduction in bureaucracy that it offers for far more people who don't necessarily want the bother of a direct payment to take on and have personalised support.
Gary and Jackie, did you spot any questions?
Yeah, I've seen something I just want to comment on, a couple of things I want to comment on. There's two things. Someone talked about CTBs. We have people with personal health budgets we work on with an ISF as well as social services. But also the biggest thing Devon have been really good at is that we have some people that are joint funded, health and social care, and they're both on a joint funded ISF as well. So we've been very lucky with the council we have to actually be able to kind of conquer all the realms of it, which is health, joint funding, and social care funding. So really, it's a whole mixture of kind of different funding streams. Jackie? Yeah.
I haven't skipped through all the questions yet, but I think we'll have a look through them.
Is there anything, because I didn't read as I was going along, anything you've seen, Simon, that you think we should answer?
Well, one thing that Ruth asked that I thought was really important was about planning and care planning and where the power lies, I think, if I understand Ruth's question. So she asked, does the ISF provider take the care and support plans and identify with the person how you could meet needs? And maybe there's just this issue of planning, because planning takes a really strange life, doesn't it?
So we do this jointly, really together now, don't we, Jackie?
Yeah. So the eligible outcomes are set by the care manager, but not how you meet those eligible outcomes. So that goes back to the person to take control of that alongside the provider.
So what we do very clearly when we start the planning process, Simon, everybody can have any plans about anything they want to have. Whether they want to go on holiday, meet Robbie Williams, whatever those plans could be, yeah? But what we do is unpick what is an eligible need and what isn't an eligible need as we do it. So actually this can be paid for out of your budget, and if you want this to happen, you might have to pay for this through other means. So we're very clear about how things are funded, and we're very, very clear about we all needs, not just the eligible needs from social services. So when we do the planning, it's a holistic approach to planning, and we look at everything that person wants to do and look at how we can achieve it, whether that's through volunteers, whether it's through community groups, whether it's through paid support. And for me, the two things I stick by is, if I was going to a gym, I would not want a support worker to take me to a gym, because they wouldn't have the skills I need to learn to lose weight and to lift things in the correct way. I would want a personal instructor from the gym. So actually, with an ISF, we can actually purchase that for that person. Same with aromatherapy, someone's very anxious, and let's work really well with people with autism. Actually, aromatherapy, if you can get the people who do the right the tasks for that person, can be brought in. So the planning stage is really important, but then when you've done the planning stages, bring in the right people to support that person to make the plan happen. And you're looking outside the usual box of support worker or resource from social services, but actually the whole holistic, there is a whole community out there willing to support that person become and fulfill their lives.
And the advocacy services are used. So if people haven't got an advocate, or possibly have got advocates but want an independent one, then a referral is made for us to Devon Advocacy Service, and they certainly meet up with the person and do a lot of work pre the review stage, which then they can support them to have a voice.
But what we do find now, Simon, very quickly, and I will end it on this, but what we are finding now, actually, people are solving their own questions with their staff teams now. A lot of the kind of pre-planning is all done. So when someone has an assessment, it's all done ahead of, because they're actually, because of we're meeting regularly and talking, these things are being achieved regularly. We don't need to have these great big old-fashioned planning sessions we used to have. And I think that's the biggest swing and change I've seen. We used to sit down and do these great planning sessions. Now, actually, it's happening every day of somebody's life.
And the control definitely sits with the person being supported now, which is great.
So, so this is maybe builds on this, but I think Bex Barker asked a question about entitlement, and then somebody else, I'm sorry, I've lost track of it now, was asking a question about the bureaucracy of ISF. So maybe I'll direct this question a bit at Chris. I mean, in a sense, what Gary's saying is that this is a kind of entitlement, isn't it, really? Because it's not really the person's money. The bureaucracy is still there in the system. Gary and everybody's trying to figure out eligible for eligible need is in a way a reflection of the brokenness of the system.
Simon, I think what you're saying is, but actually the bureaucracy is only one part of that. Because actually other people have other benefits and other resources. It's looking at the whole thing, for sure, rather than just the individual parts.
I think it's a sign of, and this isn't a judgment about anything you're doing, but it's a sign of our welfare system, isn't it? That if you're poor or if you're disabled and you've got to worry, can I spend my money on this or on this? Then that isn't a proper personal entitlement, like, is it? So this isn't your fault, but it's a journey we're on to get people to be really in control when they're not worrying about what the social worker thinks about their need. Yeah. So anyway, so we don't need to, we're not responsible for solving this problem. But I mean, I wondered about Chris and your, like, and also Liz was asking, how do you get local authorities engaged and interested in this? And how do we fight back on the bureaucracy that comes almost with every system?
Well, I guess for us, from experience, is probably start the conversation up with them and start kind of knocking on the door and saying, hey, we'd like an ISF. Because we've been approached by local authorities where that's happened, who've then come to us and said, oh, can you tell us a bit more about ISFs? We've had some people in our local area. But at the moment, I guess there's not much noise around ISFs and there's not many people kind of knocking on the door saying, hey, what about this ISF thing? It's difficult because under the Care Act, obviously you don't have an entitlement to an ISF, it's just considered good practice. But obviously on the NHS side with personal health budgets, it is an entitlement to request an ISF. So I think people have there's a much stronger kind of power to people who have funding through health at the moment than social care. But hopefully those two things eventually will join and social care will actually catch up in terms of making it an actual kind of statutory duty to offer an ISF.
So really, people like Jenny Carter and Russell Kennedy and the other self-advocates on this call are vital for making progress. They need to be talking to their local authorities, saying if this is something that's important to either them or their friends or other self-advocates, then that's actually one of the best routes for us to make meaningful social change. Okay, that's really helpful. Anything else that we've got 3 minutes to go? I'm wondering which was, there's a really nice message from Birmingham I'm sorry if I've forgotten the name of the person, but they're talking about end-of-life care and ISFs. And I think that's I think this is an area where also we need to be thinking is people with chronic health conditions, really complex needs, and older people, just being able to work differently with the voluntary sector and get different kinds of support available is really important, isn't it? I think Gary, did you want to come in there?
Two things. First, somebody's asked about sharing resources. We've got tons of resources, and we're really, really, really willing to share anything we've got with anybody. So if we can get a list of things people want, we might be able to give them to you to actually put on, Simon, and share. And the second bit about what you just said about the kind of the voluntary sector and getting things in. This lady who's now giving a day service up and wants to use her budget more creatively, she's got a volunteer who might be going down to the allotment with her. We can use that money to actually benefit, some of the things they might need for the tools or something they might need to work together. So for me, it's about how we are creative and encouraging people to volunteer. Evan's just done a really good thing about volunteering as well. And Jackie and I have just worked with all our coordinators, and we put a list out to everybody we support about their interests and hobbies and all their friends and family. So we can start linking people with our kind of similar interests doing things. So we've got lots of things like that. We're trying to kind of be imaginative about people not being stuck in the system and stuck with the people around them who just they feel can supply that at the moment.
And Chris, is there any last word from you then? We're approaching that half-hour mark and we're going to the end. What's your last thought?
Well, I guess living in Dorset on the border of Somerset, I think probably what's happening in Somerset is one of the most interesting things I think in the country around. I think there's been some points made about how you grow micro providers and how you grow that kind of economy of alternatives to the big providers. Somerset obviously brought in Community Catalyst a few years ago, and I think now they've got something like 600 micro enterprises supporting. I think I saw a tweet the other day saying that they're supporting 11,000 people in Somerset, and all of that's through direct payments and the power of kind of direct payments and personal budgets. But in my mind, it's kind of like, wow, imagine if we could get Somerset and all the local authorities and the CTBs in the country using individual service funds. Imagine what we can unlock with that kind of combination of budgets flowing out plus human creativity. I think it's quite exciting. But I do think, Somerset, the micro provider stuff is, I think what it is it's a bit like going to a shop for me, and there's only a couple of things on the shelf, and then people are surprised why people aren't taking personal budgets. There's not much necessary to do with them in some areas. So what Somerset have done is they've kind of filled the shelves of the shop with, hundreds of different options for people to go out, really bespoke to meet their whatever it is that they're interested in. And then suddenly you've got an explosion of people wanting to take a personal budget. So it's a little bit chicken and egg. But I think commissioners should focus on growing these alternatives and growing that kind of availability of different things for people, and then combine that with broadening the offer, direct payments plus individual service funds. Then you're going to have a brilliant kind of local offer for people.
And Jackie, did you want to just end with any last thoughts?
All I can say is really you need to make that step to ISF, because now I have, and to begin with, my knowledge was really poor on ISFs and I didn't have a lot of confidence in it. I can't tell you how positive they are and what a change it has made to the people that are on ISF. I work with many people on direct payments. Direct payments haven't got the amount of flexibility that the ISF's got. And also for a lot of people we support with learning disabilities, they've got elderly parents that maybe have managed a direct payment. A lot of direct payments were being misused. With the ISF, it gives the local authority protection because the provider takes responsibility that they're not being misused, but they are extremely more flexible than the direct payment.
Thanks. And Gary, a last thought from you?
I just think I have been working, like I say, a long time in this, and I've never seen people fulfill their lives so much as I have done through ISFs. And I'm really grateful that I've been able to work and be part of that journey with people.
Okay, thank you all. Thanks to all three speakers that did a great job in timing. Thanks for all the audience with the great questions. I know that we haven't answered all of them, but we will be doing more seminars. There is lots of written information available. We will make all of these slides and this film available online. stay in touch. We have a digital meetup listing which lists all the different things that the centre and Citizen Network and our members are sharing for free. So there's lots of information out there, lots of things you can get involved. Join Citizen Network and join a community of people who want to make a world where everyone matters.